get the pleasure and honor of introducing Vivek Shandas, who is a professor of climate adaptation and the director of
You talk clearly loud.
Sustaining Urban Places Research Lab at PSU. Is that correct? Okay, good. He's also the chair of Portland Urban Forestry Commission. Oh, you were it.
I didn't resign, but kind of.
Okay. Timed out.
Yeah,
Like
years is all they want to say.
Okay. Well, you contributed a lot. And you've published over 100 scientific publications, many books, 4 books, maybe more. And your work has appeared in New York Times, National Geographic, and other publications around the nation on your work with heat islands. He studies the effect of urban development patterns and processes on environmental health and supports community adaptation from extreme events such as urban heat, air quality, and storms. And I think that you might have been the predictor of the heat dome that we have. Is that correct?
I don't know about predictor, but I saw coming.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
What happens?
So we have a wonderful expert here to decision. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation.
Yeah.
So I hope you can kind of make self out. I mostly use this to keep myself organized. And just to kind of like make sure I hit the points that I want to. But yeah, we're a small enough group. We can keep this informal. If anything sounds a little bit off or sounds like it isn't coming through clearly, please online or in the room, just clear your throat. Yeah, I can know when to pause. But yeah, I'm kind of titled this A Toxic Past, Heated Future, in part because I'm just seeing that we're experiencing a lot of shifts in the region, and wanted to just kind of think about how this. I appreciate the invitation because it really gave me a chance to like hone in this like national scale stuff to a very specific site, and it let me study a bit more over the last few weeks about the site. I've read pretty much most things on the site. I have a pretty good sense for the chronology of it from going back to the 1920s out to today, and then even some of the potential that it might have for a bunch of cleanup and other activities that are ongoing. So thanks for that. It was really helpful for me to get going. I like to do this in part because I just realized that, there's so many people. I'm here talking to you in part because there's so many people involved in enabling me to be here. And I like to attribute this to mostly my late mother, though is really just so many folks who have been foundational to the privilege of being able to participate and engage with you today. So I read this as an able-bodied cisgender male who, through no known agency of my own, found myself in a supportive family structure after birth, and whose parents and local community nurtured my physical body, provided financial support, and encouraged my intellectual and spiritual development. These early privileges are the foundations that enable me to be able to engage with you today. And it's in part that I build on this work to try to get a better sense for what it might mean. I like to think about things in the big scale, so planetary scale. And so I'm looking at kind of ice core data from Oregon State University. I'm looking at various other studies. This one came out in 2020 in the journal Science, and it just documented, it's one of my favorite kind of summary graphs. It documents how the Earth has gone from this warm period to this cool period where we had glaciers above us a mile high to now a whole series of potential shifts that are underway, and trying to get a sense for what those shifts mean at the local level. So really that's what I am. These big science things are hard for me. There are a lot of colleagues of mine that spend a ton of time on this big science. I wanted a bit more, the way I tend to approach it is the ecology of everyday life. The idea that we are interacting with our dogs along the riverfront, we're walking around neighborhoods, we're driving through them, etc. And those experiences really define and in many ways embed within us an experience that tells us a little bit about the space that we inhabit. And I tend to think about things in that very local way because it then brings some meaning to that space. So as a geographer by training, I tend to think about place and space. And so I'll get into the kind of the methodologies I tend to lean on. But this person walking on one side of the street, another person walking on a different side of the street where it's shaded and not shaded. It's one of my favorite ways to kind of think about that everyday experience. Whether you have your dog with its paws touching that hot pavement and walking through, I think about that with my puppies all the time. And it's one of those things where um, we're starting to get a better sense for how to live in a way that recognizes that there are differences that happen seasonally, but also in terms of the surfaces that we're constantly encountering. Um, this is a little description about a neighborhood not too far from here that has a whole bunch of houses on this side. On one side, has kind of a street with houses on the left side as well of the screen, but you can't see the street in part because it's completely covered in a canopy, in a forested canopy. And those are just literally one block apart, very different experiences of that place. Even though you say, I live in this neighborhood, your experience being on this street versus being on this street is measurably different, not only from the quality of air one breathes, the kind of temperatures one experiences, the amount of rainfall that actually hits the ground in the neighborhood without trees. It's a very palpable difference, measurable. And then I have another one that has a picture here that has no green space at all. So I tend to look at these neighborhoods in terms of layers. What happened there to create this, and what is it that would layer upon this as we go into the future? This is an image of the Portland Harbor area. It's has a whole bunch of kind of industries that are here in around the river, and it's when you see it, it's for me, it's a classic image of legacies. It's like, what have we done to the landscape? How has that been layered over time with different decision-making processes that have allowed specific land uses to emerge in one place or another? In Oregon, we had how do I put this? We had a relatively permissive siting process in the early 1900s that allowed a lot of these large scale developments to show up right alongside the river. And that was pretty standard throughout the country, though some places had a lot more of it than others. And so when I look at this, I immediately see the shipwrecking and the shipyards of the 1940s for World War II. I see in this a lot of the kind of shifting and moving of people out of a specific space to create these landscapes and to really figure out how do we actually then reoccupy the space in a way that allows these industries, for example, to sit along the river. And obviously enough, there's river access, there's rail access, there's a number of different ways to get that you've all thought about, I'm sure, in great detail for why this is positioned the way it is and why we have that kind of heart of industry in those locations. I take this to also then this is some of the research I was digging into about the harbor and Erin Goodling's work. I don't know if you've seen that, People's History, super interesting. She's a former student and did really an ethnographic approach to understanding like what are people experiencing in this, and wrote this kind of ecology from below perspective, which was very illuminating for me. There's been a lot of news press around this, and thinking about what it means both from a kind of recent past as well as a century-long past. And so I spent a lot of time kind of trying to situate my own work, which isn't ethnographic in its approach, doesn't have the kind of like deep-rooted cultural dimensions of how Erin and others. So I like to complement what is already out there with at least the approach that I can bring, and maybe offer a few thoughts here about where the work we're doing can complement this. This is the summary of a lot of what Erin Goodling's work and others who have written about it. It's kind of layers of kind of a lot of layers in the way this graphics is set up, and it's just a lot of kind of trauma exclusion down below. There's subsistence survival, which is a lot of the indigenous, and then there's the recreation and leisure parts of this. And this area is really a story a lot about what has happened over time and how those specific actions have created a like literally and figuratively a confluence of the specific landscape that's there, the ecosystem that's there, the communities that were and are there now, and the economic and global market system that we're all a part of. And it created dispossession of spaces. Aaron spends a lot of time on the unhoused population in that piece, as you might recall if you've seen it. I encourage you to take a look if you haven't seen it. It really documents it quite thoroughly. So just kind of moving into this a little bit more, I'm a geographer. I use maps and sensors and ways to see larger landscapes that are hard for me to do immediately with my eyes. So mapping and kind of sensor technologies, as well as looking at historical maps, tends to be my go-to for a lot of at least the methods I apply. And so when I see this, which some of you sent me, this is the EPA's Superfund site interactive map. And so I zoomed in here just on the Portland Harbor, and you can, this little dialog box is here. But if I move this over, let me see if I can get this to move. You can see the whole harbor here, and you can see the number of sites that are there are incidents of national significance that are on this. There are federal facilities, Superfund facilities. There are several federal facilities. There's brownfield properties through here as well. So it kind of inventories all of the activity. It is one of the hot spots, literally, of all of the industries. And it's not surprise again to you, but it was remarkable to see this map. I hadn't seen it before, though. When I look at this map, I don't see this set of industries. I see a number of other things that show up. First thing I see is historic segregation policies that went through in 1930s in Portland. It had a pretty dramatic effect on the current landscape. When I do some of my tree research and I look at where the trees are, it's pretty much consistently in the neighborhoods that were considered, quote, the best in the 1930s, and very few trees in the neighborhoods that are considered, quote, the hazardous neighborhoods, as the language was set up. So the red areas are right adjacent, and yellow and red areas are right adjacent to the harbor. So this was not something that emerged, needless to say to any of you, yesterday, day before yesterday. This has been a century long, if not more, in the making, and it really set the stage for where the land ended up becoming a lot less expensive, because you're essentially, by designating certain lands hazardous, you're disinvesting in those areas, and in a sense, that land loses its value, loses its land rent value, and when a big industry wants to show up, as did in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, as these policies were in place, that's the cheapest land, and lay a lot of concrete and put in a lot of tanks. And so that's where you immediately see this historical reality kind of manifest in the current day of just this particular one of the policies that's in place. We looked a little further. The Oregon, oops, here's another map. I'm going to keep moving this little thing around. This is another map looking at years ago, there was a Cleaner Air Oregon policy after a big debacle that happened with, I don't know if you remember, there was a bunch of moss on trees that were used as bioindicators, and they were able to wash that moss and get moss doesn't have roots, so it essentially holds on to all those air pollutants. And as a bioindicator, you can use it as a indicator for where all of the toxins are. And that was a very clever way for some folks from the U.S. Forest Service to go out and actually collect all this, and then use my colleague's lab at PSU to essentially wash it and get a toxic release map. And we were finding essentially that areas that had a lot of these industries had very high levels of cadmium, had high levels of chromium 5, had high levels of various carcinogenic pollutants. And they were finding that in the moss. And the news went into, like, these are glass manufacturers that did this, and it was a lot more than that. There were so many, and what we're essentially able to now do is see where that distribution of various different arsenic, cadmium, chrome, lead, etc., where it had accumulated over decades, and this moss was a telltale. And so when I see that Superfund map, EPA Superfund map, I immediately take it back, 100 years, and then start taking it back to what do we know about those sites now. And so mapping and this kind of these techniques are really helpful. When we go from air pollutants like that, and we look at the social characteristics of this site, of the harbor site, I did a little analysis as part of this to kind of understand what is the exposure of these air pollutants. Namely, I had data on nitrogen oxides, airborne nitrogen oxide that comes from gas pipes and various industries that emit NO2. It's a respiratory irritant. It's a criteria pollutant. And particulate matter, diesel particulate matter is another pollutant we had some pretty good data on from an EPA-funded project. And we took those as an exposure. So you're exposed to those air pollutants. We put a bunch of census data, U.S. census data around population, income, around poverty level, education, and then age, younger and older, largely being folks who are potentially vulnerable to these pollutants, and then just looked at the total. And when we put all those, stack those together and just create a very simple formula to get at this social vulnerability index, what we find, interestingly, is that the harbor, I'm going to move this over. The harbor over here, this is a map of the Portland metro region. And interestingly, the harbor pops out as the most, the site that has the greatest concentration of these characteristics where there's where there's the highest number of population of under 18, of over 65, of lower high school education, etc. So we start kind of seeing that there is this concentration. And we can do this in a variety of different ways. These were just the measures that were relatively easily accessible to me. So I was able to just notice that it really popped out. Like there are places out in East Portland, East County that are Multnomah County that also have been consistently showing up as more socially vulnerable as these indices are set up. And so it's like it became a little bit of a challenging result when I kind of looked at it closely. So far, so good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's amazing.
Yeah. Okay. So we're in air, so I'm going to shift over to heat, which is why I came here. But I spend time on atmospheric things, so air is one of the things we spend.
Sorry, just to interrupt.
Yeah, anytime.
Has this been published, or are you showing us just something you created just for tonight?
I'm showing you something that I started on probably about 2 years ago, but never finished, but then finished tonight.
What?
I mean, I haven't seen that map before,
Yeah,
so it's really,
It's amazing.
it's really revealing.
Yeah.
It popped louder than I anticipated. And there are people who do these social vulnerability indices for all kinds of things. Like, there's a variety of other studies I've seen. And this exposure measure changes occasionally. You can do it with heat. You can do it with, fish intake. You can do it with any kind of environmental kind of insult, in any kind of environmental harming agent. And then the socioeconomic stuff is usually pretty common. That's just looking at older people, younger people, people who don't have a high financial coping ability. And then the total population was just because you just want places where there's a lot more people, it's a lot more exposure. So there's not been published. So if we take that as kind of groundwork a little bit, and then we go into this heat side of things, this has been published numerous times. Like this is work that we took these measurement campaigns. I'll talk a little bit more. We took a bunch of sensors and drive around and collect hundreds of thousands of air temperature and humidity measurements, and we go around the Portland metro area. This is just Portland. In the morning, we do this in the afternoon, we do this in the evening. There's about 20 cars simultaneously going and a bunch of bikes going at the same time. And what was interesting about this, when I dug in a little bit more, was that when you look at just the harbor, so this is morning. You notice East Portland, if I could bring this closer to you, I would, but East Portland's cool, relatively cool in the morning. It heats up during the afternoon, and in the evening, it really bakes into the main thoroughfares. 122nd, 205, Powell, these are all very noticeable places that get particularly hot. Though what's interesting, there are places that stay hot all the time. Oh, come on a little guy. There are places that stay hot all the time. This is the harbor. I just zoomed into the harbor, and you'll notice it stays hot in the morning. It remains hot, though there's a little tendril of cool in this little pocket inlet here, and then it gets really bakes in the evening. So the harbor is pretty much a place where heat is always present. And this is on a day where the airport's reading about 95 degrees. And what the harbor usually ends up being on a day the airport says 95 is about 108, 110 degrees. So it's about a 15-degree difference from what the airport reading is in this site along the harbor. You'll notice just immediately adjacent to the harbor, though, this is Forest Park, and the areas next to it tend to be really cool and more elevated, more vegetated. Just a physical reality of what's on the landscape right now, not surprisingly. So that was another like, oh, wow, it is one of those hottest areas. And industrial corridors like Swan Island and North Portland are among the city's hottest areas, and often 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than residential zones immediately adjacent to it that are still tend to be hot as well. There's about a 20-degree difference between the hottest and coolest areas of Portland, and the harbor is consistently on the hotter side of things. Let me move this one more time. So I guess the question that I've been wrangling with is what makes the harbor's heat so dangerous? Like, what is it about heat in the harbor? And this is where I had to really kind of sit and think about, like, what are the examples around the country that I've seen around places that have legacy landscapes like this, that have a lot of concretized landscape and have just a lot of industry there. And I kind of landed, you can probably help me jog thinking on this, but I landed on a handful of things, but really, in summary, it's adjacency. It's really what's near and around it. That's really what I'm talking about. And what I mean by that is just 5 points. One is infrastructure and exposure. So this is essentially saying that developed surfaces, they amplify temperatures. We know that. So we've seen, like, for example, I've done this in Tacoma and Seattle. I haven't done it in Portland, but we've seen, like, when those ports, like Seattle Port and Tacoma Port, when it gets really hot, those are very concretized. We see this plume of hot air essentially lift up in the afternoon when the sun hits around 2, 3. It just bakes in. When the sun starts going down, all of that air starts to cool, and that a very hot surface, essentially just through sheer physics, it lets all that heat go up into the atmosphere. Hot goes to cold, cold goes to hot. That's happening on a planetary scale, and it's happening at that very local scale. And so all that plume of hot air, we're able to measure it, and then the winds pick up around 4 or 5, and we see that just essentially going up and blowing into the adjacent neighborhoods. So that's a very common phenomenon that we see happening. We've seen that wind go as far as Issaquah in Washington, which is interesting from that local area. That's the infrastructure. That's the exposure part of it. You've already talked about fish and ecosystems. One of the things that we've seen very consistently happen, I think you're not surprising to you, is that when we see like today, for example, we had a very clear day. Boy, it was a gorgeous day. And folks like me who tend to think about, oh my gosh, is that water supply gonna be there in the summer? And I try not to. I'm like, the sun feels so good. But I'm just like walking my dog, thinking about that, dogs, and thinking about that. And one of the things that came up is that the sun's hitting a lot of those surfaces. And in the fall and spring, we have Chinook running, right? We have the common runs that happen. And when that sun hits that surface in the winter, we don't get a lot of rains in the summer, though it's increasing lately. What we see is that rain essentially hitting that warmed surface and heating up that water and going into the stream. So that's a very big deal for temperature, TMDLs, total maximum daily loads of temperature increases in and around the harbor. I haven't measured the harbor's temperature. I imagine maybe some of you have in that stretch. There's gauges, I know. I haven't looked at it in much, but we can look at it in terms of date, look at it in terms of when that rainfall occurs, how much that water is heating up in an area adjacent to the harbor versus not. That's the kind of stuff my grad students love to dig into. And I do too. But that affects habitat, that affects fish, that affects biodiversity more generally, because that water temperature is really hot. It's not a fast flowing river, I've noticed. I don't know if you've seen it. It's not a particularly fast flowing river in that location. It tends to be relatively stagnant. So that further can amplify that temperature. If there's organic materials brought into it, it's an algae bloom condition. So there's kind of ecosystem considerations that go on with it. There's a lot, there's in the area, there's unhoused populations. There's populations that are, as Aaron Goodling's report or article gets at, there are people living nearby that are exposed to that water and air who have potentially who could experience health related events from from those heat waves over time. And then the last couple of things, infrastructure failure. One of the things I'm starting to look at a lot more is places like the harbor that have a lot of infrastructure. When the sun hits it in the summer and it's multiple days of over 100-degree temp or over 90-degree temperatures, all that material expands. It just physics, it just expands with the heat, and then sun goes down, it contracts. And when you have a greater range, and this is the folks out of Baltimore doing some really interesting work on this, when you have a greater range of expansion and contraction, so when it gets hotter and gets cooler, you see that material wearing out a lot more quickly. It's just a wear and tear phenomenon. And so one of the things, I don't have any evidence on this, but one of the things I started speculating about was the fact that there is a lot of material expanding and contracting. We see this on roadways. When I do work with transportation folks, they're immediately like, what can we put on the roads to extend the longevity of the road? And so these paint companies have essentially shown up with this cool seal material that they're starting to kind of place all over. They put it in a bunch of neighborhoods in LA that I was at recently. And it essentially is supposed to extend the longevity of the road because it keeps the material from expanding as much as it would if that material wasn't on it. So there's these kinds of.
What color is it white?
They had it white at first, but the glare, because they were putting it on roads, the glare was too much. The local residents were like, this is killing my property value. No one wants to live next to a white road like this. And so the city took it seriously and talked to a few of these large companies like Cool Seal, and they essentially have now made it into a more of a transparent color. So it looks like there's just a little sheen on the road. I've taken my measure. I was there actually for an event back in last September, and I brought my little surface temperature. I mounted on my phone. It's really easy to carry. I mounted on my phone. You can see what the surface temperature is, and it wasn't that much. It was probably at the most on an 85-degree day. It was only about 4.5 degrees Fahrenheit difference between the sealed area and the non-sealed area. And I was like, what is the big deal? This is not a big difference on surface temperature because surfaces vary so much. But it turned out that their claim is not that it's going to cool the air temperature, it's just going to extend the longevity of that road.
How thick is the seal?
That's a whole different question.
Yeah.
That's a whole different question because one of the tricky things is that we don't have good testing. We don't have a lot of evidence on that yet. So the companies are pretty restrictive over ingredients and proprietary stuff, so you can't really unpack it. You're going to have to pull it off and then analyze it, and it's above my pay grade for sure. So it's a super interesting, important question. Even to know whether the runoff is there, right? We don't even know whether how hard it holds on. They have these trucks. Like I talked to the guy who runs the truck, who has the sprayers on the back of it, and he was essentially he didn't do it, but he was showing how it works. They take all the cars off the side of the road and they spray up and down the road. But I could see them coming to the harbor and saying, hey, this stuff would reduce wear and tear on all this infrastructure here. I could see that as a very easy pitch that would be made to the city for potentially like reducing the wear and tear. It's an area material engineers are spending a lot of time on right now. Yeah, for sure. So that's kind of infrastructure. And the last piece is the compounding natural hazard that came up. The other thing we're noticing with heat is that when an area heats up, as I was saying in the Seattle and Tacoma, that heat goes up and then the wind blows and it takes it. In this area, Forest Park is immediately adjacent, and that wind in the summer comes from the west. Wind in the winter generally in the area comes from the east, but it mixes this area, the confluence of the Willamette and Columbia. It's a mixing zone for a lot of that wind. So the wind actually there's a cool map on windy.com. You can see it. The wind does these really psychedelic eddies and starts to like move, not directly in a what they call a laminar flow across in one direction. It starts to actually mix in this area by the harbor as I was looking at it. And it tends to have these wafts that go up Highway 30 and up onto the ridge there, especially if it's warm. So it lifts up and goes onto that Forest Park. And then I started going down this rabbit hole of like, oh wow, so that's drying out soils. One thing we know about fires is that dry soils increase vulnerability of trees. Once the trees are vulnerable, they're more likely. There's a greater likelihood of ignition and conflagration. So that hot air accumulated over time over a summer, just blowing consistently onto the Forest Park is essentially drying out that section of above Highway 30. So I started wondering what that means, and I haven't done soil moisture tests, but it got me really like wondering, boy, that would be a really fun measurement campaign to do, is to essentially set up there. They have these probes now that go in about 18 to 36 inches, and you can essentially see how much the soil moisture is changing in that depth. And that's really important when it comes to like understanding fire likelihood. And with that huge park right there and with the kind of conditions we're seeing, it's not a fun conversation.
No.
It's not a fun conversation. Yeah.
So the corollary to that,
Yeah.
with an updraft going up into Forest Park,
Yeah.
the CEI hub is full of fuel tanks that in the heat are expanding and pushing vapors out of the tanks.
Sure.
So then those are being lifted up
Lifted up as
over
well.
a dry
Right.
forest.
Right. Yeah. That's a really helpful. I don't think we have any good measurements of that, but again, it's not something that's inconceivable to do.
What could go wrong?
Yeah.
If you were wanting to lower those temperatures, and maybe you're going to get to that, specifically looking at Swan Island and that
Yeah.
heat island effect on both sides of the islands, would if there was like an opportunity to like do heavy reforesting
Yeah.
in that area, planting lots of trees to cool down. How would that impact the river too? Would the river's temperature be
Yeah.
impacted by that as well? Because I'm just thinking if that infrastructure is that hot, I can only imagine that the water next to it is going to be just as hot as
Yeah.
well.
So you're really bringing up shade, right? The idea of what can shade do to cool, and so that is one of the tools in the toolbox. I'm sure you can do mechanical shade, you can do trees, biological shade. My sense, there's a group of students that do these grad students that do a workshop, and they worked with a bunch of folks that were connected to the Port of Portland, but focusing on the Swan Island area. And they interviewed a series of a lot of the business owners and managers, and they just had very little interest. This was about 10 years ago as a project, I remember. They had very little interest in trees. We did a project up in Burien in Washington recently and did the same thing along a corridor where they were going to, like, the city wanted to do a greening campaign, like beautification type thing. The business owners are like, yeah, am I going to have to clean that up? No, thanks. I'm good. I don't want any of those trees there. So there's that piece. Just set that aside for the challenge of getting trees into like commercial corridors and industrial corridors. That there's just a bottleneck there. I've observed over time. In terms of where you put the trees and shade, if I take that information and say we can't put it on the site, where I tend to go is on the edges of the site. And if you can put trees along the edges of the site, we've started seeing some work coming out of Germany that shows that it reduces noise. It actually works as a filter. It can actually filter certain pollutants, especially diesel particulate matter and these bigger like PM10 and these bigger particulates. So you can put it around the site, and that would be along the river. So then you get shade, and that's a big part of the ecosystem service water quality trading program the Willamette Partnership runs. Like they're doing it, they've had one trade, but there's other such markets around the country that are doing a lot of water quality trading. And one of the things that's coming up is trees over creeks and rivers. for reducing temperatures. So it's a common practice. It's done. We've got a lot of examples of it around the country. It's the owner of that property adjacent to the river gets essentially these payments for ecosystem service, payments for the service they're providing to shade the river. So that was a way, at least, to get smaller, mid-size property owners to buy. I'm doubtful that level of payment or approach would necessarily work in this site. But there could be other programs that you think about for that shade.
We just have a comment online of just dating Oak Pennsylvania dangerous industrial fires. We have several every year in Portland and associated smoke, the danger to firefighters have to put these out, employees are heat illness during warehouse work and other industrial works, and bacteria in warm stagnant water, poisoning fish, wildlife.
That's a great list. Let me go for a brainstorm.
Yeah.
That was a great list. So there's the workers at the site. So this is the other thing that the feds actually are really looking at this a bit, is looking at how exposure in certain occupations to heat can really affect economic productivity as well as health and well-being of the workers. And so I've had some conversations with a few folks, federal office folks, who are interested in and to a certain extent state offices. California is doing a lot with this, partly because they have a lot of farm workers and others that are outside day laborers that are really impacted by that extreme heat, but indoor folks working not only in the harbor area, but even in the buildings themselves, which are often warehouses, often not cooled. So we've done some indoor outdoor monitoring and found that there is a lot of effect when the big thick cinder block gets hot from the outside. It goes, that temperature, essentially latent temperature, goes to the inside. It moves through that wall and heats up the interior spaces as well. So a multi-day heat wave is rising temperatures for workers. Yeah, thanks for jogging my thinking a lot.
Where is the map? Where is that located? Is that a piece of Portland?
This is actually my own just image that I crafted to give it some color. That's about all I did. This is trying, because I tried to get a thermal image of the harbor and I started spending too much time digging it, so I just made one up. Yeah, it is there. It's just you can't get it quite as high resolution as the one that I picked up here, which is actually a place in South Korea, a harbor in South Korea, outside Seoul, and I just amazed at how much high resolution imagery and data Seoul has right now. They put sensors on every single lamppost. There's like CCTV, there's like temperature, they even have like how many people are walking by this lamppost. So it's a mind-blowing, and it's all open access. So I've had a student download a lot of that, and we're looking actually at how the air and heat are distributed in the city of Seoul, which is a huge area, also a harbor city.
Well, I think one thing, like in the harbor, is some of us are trying to get a mandatory setback from the river.
Right. Sure.
And
it's a great
there is some movement towards, increasing the setback, but it tends to be a zoning issue, so that a property owner would have to sell or change their business. So it can take a long time. And maybe with a Superfund cleanup, there'll be some, restoration of banks. And I guess one question I had was, can a smaller group of trees, like red twig dogwoods, willow, not like huge trees, can industry be convinced will that make a difference if they just will do, like, some of those properties could kind of stick some red twig dogwoods in and create some shade, even if it's not like the bigger shade trees. And I was just wondering if those little compromises, they believe that their boats, even if they don't have any boats, can't dock. It's for them, is
for sure.
And even if they don't have a boat, they don't want to lose the right to have a vote.
You're right, right.
Even though, I don't know, if you studied the harbor, you would see that Toyota
Oh, yeah.
made a big riparian area and planted trees, and they have the biggest boats in the harbor.
Yeah. Yeah, you can see it from space.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
even though we have this huge example of a big industry having trees,
Yeah.
it's, I don't know, I just don't know where we can push or where, and the super fun, I mean, we have Hunter here, but they're only required to plant where there was contamination, right? They're not required necessarily.
Mm.
And of course, there's gonna be the tree code, and we're all gonna be pushing
Yeah.
as hard as we can to have heavy industry be required to have. But like the Amazon warehouses, they took down a lot of trees.
Sure. Oh, yeah, I have plenty of pictures of that. Yeah, and now it's the warehouses have come and kind of that's like yesterday. Now it's data centers. And so we're seeing that now emerging, and it's a very noticeable difference on the landscape. And that's they tend to be, yeah, they tend to be even more intensive in some cases than in terms of land than warehouses. But yeah, yeah. The tree code, can I just say a quick thing about tree code? My guess, I don't know. I have a kind of a cynical view of this in some ways because I think even with the new urban forest plan, that the way the state calculates economic, and you may know more about this, but my read on it is the way the state uses its cost benefit assessments to figure out the relationship between land use and economic productivity is they use a cost benefit analysis that says for every square foot of industrial space is a increase in GDP and increase in FTE, and it's all good for the economy. And so trees just don't come into that. Like it's just a one-to-one relationship from what I can gauge. And we had this big kind of choral, maybe, I don't know. It was actually a really fun conversation with Joe Zender, who was the former planning director for Portland and deputy planner for Portland. And he was just incredulous about bringing trees into the conversation in terms of whether that's even the model would even consider it, because it's just taking up space that could otherwise be used for industry. And so it didn't go anywhere. So I don't know. The tree code it'll be a harder fight with, I think, planning than it will be with the forestry. Because in forestry is running the tree code. So yeah, I'm
Yeah.
What exactly is the tree code?
It's the code that basically regulates, it's the actual thing that regulates where trees go. It's how far trees need to be from stop signs. It's it's who's taking care of the trees.
Okay.
It's all the like nuts and bolts of how the trees. The first one came out in 2015, and I'm just really pushing for how much we've learned so much about trees in the last 10 years since it's come out and what's worked and what's not worked. But they're due for a revision. Mitch Green and a few other counselors are pushing for it right now, and I'm just hoping that they take a real learning, curious approach to it as opposed to an agenda-driven approach, which I think would let go of all that we've learned over the last 10 years. With how
You're talking to them, right?
I'm trying to, yeah. I mean, I'm trying to for sure. I don't like now. I serve on the sustainability commission for the plan commission for the city, so I'm able to work through that commission to move on stuff. But trees, I mean, that commission seems to be working on not so much trees. Just say that much. So we're collaborating with the Urban Forestry Commission to try to figure out where trees are the intersection of some of these things. But I do think there's some bigger opportunities as well. I mean, I'm thinking about I'm thinking about a lot of, like you were just talking about setbacks. What if, like, just to brainstorm for a second, what if a property owner were allowed, Washington DC does this. They have easements on a chunk of private land with that the city can actually do things with. And that was set in by, what was that plan? L'Enfant's plan of, I can't say. L'Enfant's plan back in what 1860s or something, 1880s or something. It was basically laying out this plan, and there was this setback on these private properties. And that's why Washington, D.C. tree cover is amazing and still growing. It's like one of the few cities in the country that's seeing a robust increase in tree cover. And Earl Ooster, the DC forester who I know well, is like, that's a big part of it. I mean, they have Casey trees that funds them really well, but there's also this like chunk of land available. And if you could think about an easement on that property, like a conservation easement program, where you could essentially lay that along the riverfront, and it's kind of a public-private partnership of sorts that allows the property owner to essentially give up some rights to the land, but have it also taken care of.
Well, that's what the Greenway Trail's supposed to be, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
But they fight it tooth and nail.
Yeah, right.
Are eco roofs part of the discussion?
They're I don't know about the harbor, but I know that the central city has an eco roof, a green roof ordinance that's pretty robust, and there's a lot of them. I don't know how many thousand acres, but there's a lot of eco roofs that have popped up in the city largely due to Tom Lippman. There's like one person in Bureau of Environmental Services who championed that for decades, and he still has doing that work. It's amazing. I've worked with Bob Salinger quite a bit on that as well.
Do you have anything online? Questions?
No,
The Washington Post published a big long article sometime in the last year about heat islands. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah,
You could put in your zip code
oh yeah,
and
yeah.
you could get, so I looked up all over Portland.
Okay, yeah.
And it was pretty fascinating that the data is out there, that you can refine it to that extent.
Yeah. So just a quick thought on that. There's like this heat work. I don't know. I'm so in the weeds with it that a lot of this stuff that you see, that'll be surface temperatures, right? It's satellites flying over, taking 30-meter pixel pictures of the whole Earth, and it goes over at 10 a.m. in the morning over Portland and it's later in the East Coast. So the issue is that it's hitting tops of trees and it's hitting tops of buildings. And so what you end up getting in a highly urbanized environment is a building that essentially has been absorbing all of that heat over the morning and into the first part of the morning. And to me, that doesn't give you a read of a level of accuracy of the temperature. If there's a big, for example, the Moda Center, big white roof, that has not absorbed much heat. Yet when you go near it and with a air thermometer, air temperature measurement, that temperature is much higher.
Mhm.
And what we've been able to do is look at cities and compare it with satellite-derived imagery and what you and I would experience walking there. And it is in the more built-out areas, the temperatures tend to be in both areas, in the green areas and the built areas, surface temperatures tend to be very different than the air temperatures.
So what I remember,
Yeah.
it was primarily measuring canopy cover,
Okay.
because obviously Washington DC, where
Yeah.
they've got a great urban canopy,
Yeah.
was raised that curiosity. So
Yeah.
along the river here in Portland, the takeaway was that it was one of the least canopy of all the urban city.
Yeah, we have our pockets of canopy, definitely west side of the river, Forest Park, and then there's neighborhoods, of course, Irvington, Laurelhurst, large lads, large Dutch elms, and other others. But it's definitely when you start looking at areas like Mississippi, Albina, Lentz, Alberta, Cully, like you start seeing very clearly there pretty limited canopy. I mean, less than about 18% often. And the city's goal is what now? 40%, I think. 45% in the new forest plan. Yeah.
Did Dutch elm disease destroy elms?
Yeah.
Is it part of the country?
Yeah, it gets it right at the root. Yeah, it's a pretty yeah, I mean the big one now, everyone's Dutch elm, there's inoculation for. Like you can inoculate, that's what they do in Lad's Edition, for example, every year they go in and give it the flu shot, basically. But the bigger thing now is all the all the ash trees, which are largely along like these corridors. You will see ashes along in the emerald ash borer, beautiful insect, but very disastrous when it comes to olives, which are also in the ash family. Olives and ashes, which the Midwest planted so many of those, and they just leveled it. We don't have as many here in the urbanized environment, so it's more kind of in less developed areas where there are a lot of ash trees, but they go down fast.
When you talked about the reading of heat temperature,
Yeah.
for instance, the Moda Center,
Right,
as an
right.
example, and that roof temperature is going to probably be a lot cooler than, say, the ground temperature.
Yeah.
When we're watching the news and they're
Yeah.
giving temperature readings, are those temperature readings of the ground? Is that satellite reading that they're getting? Because I'm just wondering about, vulnerable populations who are forced to kind of be out in that,
Yeah.
atmosphere, and not thinking that it's maybe 92 degrees when it's actually 108.
So that news temperature is the airport. There's a box that's in every airport where they put a thermometer inside that box. It's called like there's a name for that box, the Hoffman box or something like that. It's a guy who essentially said every airport, every city needs one of these. So the National Weather Service takes all of those and use a meteorological model, lets the wind blow basically, and you see what the temperatures are in and around. So you're getting one spot. When you look at my phone and I'm like, oh yeah, today's going to be 60 degrees Fahrenheit. That's one spot, generally speaking, the average of the whole area. I think the thing we've tried to do is to show that even a block away, your temperature, your experience is very different. Like that's what those heat maps are essentially getting at. And when you find a big industrialized area like the harbor, you can really like get that measurement pretty easily. If you go above and walk on the roof, like I've been up on top of what was the big roof in LA? I was just on they had a reflect event in LA that I went to. And we were on top of this huge, it's like the convention center in LA. It's just monster, huge thing. It's a white roof, and they even have some various solar and other things on it. I was like looking at it, wow, this is like about 97 degrees. And then I go out down on the asphalt parking lot, and it's 140 degrees. And so it's just, I mean, I'm just, not even 10 meters, 30 feet away from where I had taken the other measurement. So it varies a lot by location. And what you're generally feeling is that surface temperature, you're feeling as it comes off, the wind mixes it, and that's kind of what you're feeling when you walk. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into, I have a few other things I touch on, but I don't know timing wise whether it's worth.
Just one more question. So for Botanical Gardens, we're really looking at this particular site in detail and have really been looking at the urban heat island effect in particular because we're concerned about and interested in the horticultural conditions. And
Yes.
what's unique about this site is that there's an oak pine madrone community that's thriving, and virtually everything else has been declining over years. And
Okay.
in a lot of the Willamette Valley, that sort of oak savanna and prairie
Yes.
requires cultural burning or
Yes,
some other
right.
disturbance. And yet here, there's not the fir replacement. It's a different ecosystem.
Right.
Of course, it's constructed and designed to shed water as quickly as possible. But when you mention, okay, 95 elsewhere, 110 here,
Yeah.
it makes me think, okay, well, how similar is that site or the Portland Harbor
Yeah.
to your normal Willamette Valley ecosystem? And whether you know of researchers who are studying urban heat islands as a way of looking at future climate projections, have you come across any of
Oh yeah,
that?
we're doing that for sure.
Really?
I have a colleague. I don't do it myself. I collaborate with biologists. So we're looking at, for example, I just presented it earlier today, where we looked at a site in Lents Park, a site. It was a Lents Park, a Laurelhurst, Berkeley Park in Eastmoreland, and then in North Portland. I forget the name of the park now. But we set up measurements there, and we're looking at in a park environment, roughly similar sized parks with And we were able to then get little, this is what the biologists do. They're able to look at the stress of the tree. So we looked at big leaf maple, Norway maple, Douglas fir, and red cedar. And we're essentially looking at how much, these are things I don't quite understand, but photosynthetic activities happening on a branch, how much, there's a term called quantum efficiency, how fast I think it is the water is moving or how much water is moving up the stem. And then there's another stomatal conductance is another, like, it's basically your blood pressure and your systolic diastolic the way I describe it to my students is you're basically doing a diagnostic of those trees. And we're finding that there's very clear measurable stress levels of those trees in different physical environments. And, the old moniker that I like to use is, urban trees live fast, die young. That's kind of like what we're basically seeing in a lot of these. They're just hammered. I mean, they're around a lot of like trees. You put trees along I'm just thinking about this too as I'm now going on this, is you put trees along in these industrialized corridors. Good luck, little tree. Like, I'm sorry, I'm putting you in some pretty hostile territory. You're going to try your best to send those roots out and pull that water and stay alive, but you're going to be hit left, right every day. And the public works manager in Phoenix, who I've tried to talk to about trees, he's like, I plant 100 trees, 50 of them are dying. I don't want to waste that money. That's taxpayer dollars I don't want to waste, and I'm not going to do it. And so I was like, well, what's your system for taking care of the trees? It's not just digging a hole, throwing it, and walking away. Like, let's build something around that and figure out, like, how do you get community? How do you get a municipality to actually help that tree survive? Because they're just digging it, dropping it, and leaving.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to say this is in North Portland along the river on the east side. They put the water, a water lab to test our drinking water.
Yeah.
And that border along the river filled in great.
Hmm.
I mean, it seems to me, and I don't think they're doing watering. I've never seen them water, but it's like alder and it's all native plants.
Mhm.
But I'm amazed at how, would you agree with me, people who walk there? It seems like,
How long ago?
It's a great picture.
how long,
It's a-
it's really
Well,
pretty remarkable.
It's been years. Yeah, it's been years.
How many years?
I don't, ever since they built that,
The
Built-
lab,
it's
yeah.
been 20 years.
20?
I think
So
so.
it's right along the river.
It's right along the river and it really, well, it gives me hope,
Yeah.
but it doesn't. But
There's
there's a
a
walkway and then there's a business that's in no way, hurting it,
Mhm.
so I would like to say that and then they have a water catchment system. So, I mean,
Across from world.
it's right across from the industry. So I guess one question I have, like in the CI hub, which I want to push for, is if you have intermittent lots.
Mhm.
So what Portland likes to do is say, this is the industrial area. And we're gonna make that map, just like what you said,
Yeah.
and the whole thing is gonna be heavy industrial.
Yeah.
And then Laurelhurst or something else will be the big trees.
Right.
And we have this separated.
Sure.
So there are still lots that could be green islands. And I guess I wanted to know, like, in terms of heat, in terms of air quality,
Mm.
fire protection, like stopping the wind going up into,
Yeah.
is that something I should argue for?
Mhm.
That when they have an opportunity to create those breaks,
Yeah.
are those breaks worth fighting for?
Yes.
Short answer, yes, absolutely. I wrote a couple of years ago. I wrote this piece for our regional council Metro's newsletter called My Big Backyard. Basically, taking mapping tools and saying, here are 7,212 open lots in this area, in these areas that are tree deficient. And I'm essentially saying these are, and we know who the owners of those lots are. We know how long they've been vacant. Like, this is a place where we have a big bond, 2019 bond that's still operating, $1 billion rolling, and they're purchasing all these properties. It's great. Like, they're purchasing these properties far out, like in Sandy. It's all habitat. And And I was like, there is a lot of opportunity where you can actually reduce the likelihood of fires, of creating windbreaks. And there's really strategic locations that you can purchase these lots on, whether it be fair market value, or if the, like what Metro likes to do is cut a deal with the landowner as a way to perpetuate conserve it in perpetuity with a nature neighborhoods and program, as well as the bond. And I wrote that in enthusiastic support of something like what you're talking about. There are a lot of lots that would allow that.
Even right next to the tanks.
Yeah,
There are
interesting.
lots. Actually, they have some
It would
pretty
reduce wear and
trees.
tear. I mean, there's so many things that would actually help to support that. I think strategically located on the south or west side in the northern hemisphere, you really want to try to get south and west protection on structures because that's where the wear and tear happens. Anyone on the south side of a wall of a house knows that from the paint you see chipping off it after a decade or so. It's much quicker than the rest of the house.
Wondering if the plants, native plants that are growing along that boardwalk, you know, the BES Water Lab have those little trees, those little cascara trees shading them to some degree. I wonder if that's a big help for them.
Sure.
Cause they're southern exposed, they're south exposure, and they're on a steep slope,
So
but they're doing okay. They're doing.
this is where we're going a lot more now. These questions that I'm hearing around the country are like, great, you're seeing the forest from the trees. And they're like, we want to see the trees in the forest. So now what's happening, all to say is like site level and neighborhood level assessments are now like the thing that folks are largely trying to figure out. Because now we actually at the point where the measurement technology, the mapping stuff, there's just so much high resolution data available that you can actually start seeing patterns over time. So that's what we're doing with these neighborhood campaigns. We like do these monitoring and visualizing, mapping, surveying, and workshopping with communities. This is in Cleveland, and yeah, this is exactly it. And we're putting these kind of real-time sensors in places. And I wanted to just throw out there, like, what would it be like to create a network, a mesh of network sensors in and around the harbor area? Right now, it is not there. We have 3 official sensors, EPA, in the area that does temperature, humidity, nitrogen oxides, particulate matter. I mean, the sensors, low-cost sensors, are there to be able to do it. We did it in Tacoma, and where they were years ago. We put up these sensors and we pushed it onto our servers, and you can real-time visualize these, the quality of air, where the air is moving. You can really get at a lot of this information relatively easy. And doing it with the community, that's what I've figured out. If I go in and put them up and walk away, no one knows about it or anything, but having community members participate actively in that as a community science project has been what I've found to be just a way to just accelerate the conversation and get people really motivated with some of it. Your mention of like where the trees are and stuff. This is just an example of, we take a neighborhood, we digitize it on a computer, and then we blow a bunch of hot air through that neighborhood, and we see, based on the kinds of trees that are there, the buildings, the landscape, what the temperature differences are. And we can move the trees around. That's the great thing, is you don't have to actually plant it. It's a model, so you can play it around. For example, we took this neighborhood in Northeast Portland and just asphalted. We basically simulated where we took all the trees out, and then there weren't many spaces to plant trees, but we planted where we could. Medium form trees like dogwoods and what have you, not even large form trees. And the temperature difference, the average temperature difference, this neighborhood versus the base, is about 13 degrees Fahrenheit warmer. So, and there's some parts of it that are upwards of 20 degrees warmer than other parts. So you can model these things that increasingly, so you can actually get some data on what does it mean. And then these, of course, workshops. This is a project we did in Jackson, Mississippi. It was really cool. It was a historically African-American Black neighborhood that has been gutted economically over time. There's 2 churches that bookend this corridor called Fair Street. And we worked with those churches essentially to look at what would a revitalization process look like that brought greenery that centered the community, but brought greenery in, and people were super excited. The business owners were on board with this because in part they want to see more foot traffic there. So we're moving on this. There's actually a big project now underway in that area, and yeah, a lot of stuff shows up in plans. But so yeah, that's kind of like the you can do the modeling, you can do the sensor, you can do the other work, but really, I think right now there's the information. I'll be just very frank. I don't know what information feds have with the Superfund, but information that I could find on atmosphere and heat and air and kind of landscape processes very limited for the hardware. Like I couldn't find a lot myself. I don't have access to a lot of stuff, but I generally I can sleuth out data, and I spent a good chunk of time trying to dig out various forms of data, and I couldn't find it.
I think there's a really great opportunity to expand this monitoring on the North Portland Bank in particular. When you look at the property ownership, where there's University of Portland,
for sure,
Willamette Cove, Metro, Cathedral Park, Botanical Garden. I think all would be interested, willing partners to include monitoring. So you would at least have that bank.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Oh, it'd be amazing. It would be really amazing. What you do is you monitor and then you take these models and you essentially run these models to see what happens during a 110-degree day in this area. What happens if it's opposite, a 20-degree day? And you can actually start looking at scenarios like that. And that's, again, where this field is going. So if there's interest in that, I'd be really curious.
Hunter, is EPA doing any heat monitoring? I mean, I know this isn't your decade.
So, we've done a big air monitoring program in the CEI Hub. And I believe someone's going to come talk about that at the collaborative, maybe. And I think that's looking at contaminants, but I'm sure temperature will be part of that conversation, I'm assuming. I do not work in the air program. But then as far as, the Superfund side, we really are focused on, we're more underwater, really. So we're not looking too much at air temperature. We have information on water temperature for sure. But yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Don't a lot of commercially available, like basically thermometers people have the ability to connect to the internet?
Say it one more time.
Don't a fair number of, I think you can buy like home weather stations.
Yeah, for sure.
So these may be out there.
They are. In fact, there's a
So it's not putting in sensors. You can just maybe kind of low hanging fruit is just find people that have these things and set up an internet.
Yeah, there's two really. One is called Weather Underground, which is a off the shelf kind of system. We know where every one of those are. Again, not a lot, but Arbor, I'll tell you that much. Another system is called Synoptic Data. That's a network actually. I talked to National Weather Service. They use Synoptic Data. It's another it's more proprietary, but they're able to essentially sell you data. And I've looked at those. We've done that before. And haven't been able to find much around the Arbor either. Yeah, there are big data deserts. There really are. It's remarkable along this stretch. I don't know. My mind goes to places. It's like, I wonder why there aren't so many sensors here. I don't know. Just wondering.
Are you familiar with purple air?
Oh yeah, I know purple air well. Yeah, we've put a bunch of purple air on port.
Yeah, you can literally go anywhere in the world
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
So
Tap into the database.
Yeah.
So Weather Underground is what you can use. You can tap into that.
You can,
And you're saying that you're not finding any of that in North Portland.
Not a lot of it. There are definitely sites, but the tricky part with Weather Underground is I have a station, and I happen to put it on the side yard, the south side yard. There's a house. I live in Northeast Portland, and there's a house right next to the side yard. So one place I could find a pole to put the zip tie and secure it on, and it ties to my Wi-Fi, and it works. And if I don't touch it for a year, it starts to drift. And I start seeing, oh, wow, this temperature is 7, 8 degrees off the first year. Then it becomes 13, 15 degrees off the next year. Then I'm like, it's not 136 outside right now. I can walk outside pretty comfortably. And it's this is not working. So there's a lot of that happens with both Purple Air as well as the Purple Air has two of these what called plan towers. They're little sensors, optical sensors, and they look at how much particulate matter's in the air. But those are again low cost. They're a company out of Colorado, but they're or is it Utah? I think it's Utah. But they're all over. They're a distributed network and they're all online. You can see with a black circle around it, indoor versus outdoor. We've downloaded a lot of their data. It's mixed. It's very mixed. Weather Underground, Purple Air. Synoptic is much better, but those are highly calibrated and more expensive. But yeah, low-cost sensor network around the harbor site, that's an easy one. That's an easy one. We've done it in open lots on Fair Street in Jackson, Mississippi, and put up a little sign that says, you steal this and we will come after you.
So what sort of grant funding would we need to raise in order
Yeah.
to do this type of
I
system?
think it's not, I mean, it depends, it's just who's the funder. Like, I think it would be probably, I don't know if Oregon Community Foundation, maybe not. Meyer has done some of this in the past, but it's on the order. I mean, these are small scale campaigns. This is like 50K kind of
Grant 50.
project. It's not that big of a project to do that.
So I just want to ask you, you're in the same building as planning and sustainability, right?
I'm not, no,
You're not.
no.
So do they ever ask you your advice, like when they're cranking out these plans where it's complete heat islands, zoned heat islands? These aren't like you showed in the first slide or one of the first slides. These are zoned heat islands. They're not, and maybe it happened hundreds of years ago, but they're zoned to be heat islands for certain
Oh,
neighborhoods.
interesting. I see.
And there is this philosophy of that.
Hmm.
And how we interrupt a philosophy that says it's going to be all or nothing.
Hmm.
And in more of the low income neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know whether you have any
Yeah,
influence
I mean,
on them.
I don't know. I've been friendly enough to planning, but they don't seek me
They don't
out
seek you.
much. I think I'm probably pissed off a few too many people by banging on the door a few too many times or something
That's
like
serious.
that. But I'm on I'm on that commission, so I think that's my means to do it. But that's, again, as the folks know, like the public process is a process.
Yes.
Like, oh my goodness, it's a process. It takes a long time. It's like very clunky at times. It can,
You're talking to people who've been working for 20 years on them.
Yeah, yeah. We understand.
Yeah.
Get that part.
Candace, are there any other
Yeah.
comments?
Yes, we have another question here. This is from Casimira. My question is around how in Dr. Shandas' opinion, can we draw the connection between heat and negative economic consequences?
Right.
Instead of trees and shading and conflict in industry, for example, if you have several workers with heat stroke and other issues like fires and malfunctioning equipment, what happens to your insurance rate? How do you recruit and retain employees on the site? Again, some industrial fires caused entire facility burns that you saw a few months ago in one, you watched
Or something, so
I
that
think it was a pulp mill. How can they reportedly absorb these consequences?
the trains are just attacks.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's a big question.
Yeah.
My thoughts on this are kind of like there are these pulse events that come through, these big heat events that come through, like the heat dome in 2021 June, and then there's these kind of slow burn events that happen, and those have to be seen really distinctly different. Like those are very different creatures that come through, or phenomena that come through the region, and the economics associated to those are very different. Like the economics associated to the big heat event that comes through, that's a lot of lost labor productivity. Like you lose that really quickly. You see a lot of slowing down of trains. You see shifting of airplanes. Like Phoenix has actually quantified this. The number of airplanes that are illegally coming slows down. They actually halt that. So there's ways to quantify that, and I know economists have done that. And so there's that approach. We're actually publishing a study in the next, hopefully, couple of month or so here. It's taken a long time. But we did a health cost study related to heat illness. There are studies that have looked at the cost of heat on health and attributed like a cost to a human life, for example, and they do that way. Economists can put a number on literally anything, I think. And what we've done is we kind of turned that and said, how much does it cost for an individual to go to the hospital if they can? How much does it cost the taxpayer if they don't have insurance? How much does it cost the insurance company? And so we were able to use a couple of different sources to quantify that. And then we ran a model for the whole country that looked at what it would cost. We actually did it for Clark County, Washington, and quantified the number of illnesses related to different demographics, people who have AC, don't have AC, older people, younger. And the numbers, when you look at the country, the numbers are staggering. I mean, it's in the hundreds of billions of dollars. And we did this out to 2040. We actually simulated and simulated a series of heat events based on the past into the future and quantified based on those heat events what the cost, the rising cost to society would be. And I'm really looking forward to it coming out, but because the punchline is really like it is a very quick curve that goes up, and that's a pretty conservative number for what we could estimate. I mean, heat's no joke. It's no joke. It's like one of those things when you start seeing like a shellfish industry that gets pummeled, when you see the tree, like all the trees that are impacted and the Christmas tree farms that are impacted, the farmers and the economic productivity that's lost. It's a relatively, I mean, it's an early field, economics of heat. There's a economist at Johns Hopkins that I'm working with now who's starting to like wrap his mind around it, and I'm hoping we'll get to a point where we can actually develop some ways to look at it much more like practically from a site, like a harbor site, and saying, okay, if you did X, your cost over the next 10 years would be this. If you did Y, your cost would be that. If you did Z, your cost would be this. That's where we need to go. It's not there yet at that site level. We have national studies, regional studies, but nothing on that site scale for heat. At least that I know of.
Just one more question. I was just wondering, have you, are you aware of Rob Nixon and his writing on slow violence?
Oh,
in
yeah,
the environment?
yeah, for
I was
sure.
wondering,
That's on. Yeah.
is there like do you feel like there's a I think there's
Oh,
a
for sure.
relation here.
For sure. I thought I used that term actually at some point here. Was it, yeah, I did use it. Immigrant houseless populations facing slow violence from toxic exposure while relying on river for food and shelter.
Yeah.
That's really a kind of an it's a powerful, compelling phrase for sure. The idea that the slow burn kind of thing, but then this kind of like what I think a lot of geographers call it like a place dependency, like people who live there, they're dependent on that place, whether for food or shelter. Um, and that dependency really leads to health and wellness impacts. And so yeah, it is. I'm familiar with it. It's not an area I've spent a lot of time in, but I'm very I don't know, very sympathetic, I guess.
Yeah,
to
well,
that
it just all
concept.
resonates, what's happening here in North Portland.
Right, for sure,
It's
for sure.
pretty
Is-
amazing.
It is. I mean, it's decades, centuries, however you want to look at it, right? It's a slow process, but yeah.
I think we're just about out of time, but
Yeah.
thank you so
Yeah,
much.
so
Thank you. Are there any announcements of things that are, I mean, I know that there's gonna be a rumble on the river on March 24th at the Portland Association of Teachers building, and it's gonna be on methane. So it should be an interesting one. Got some good speakers on there. The Friends of Baltimore Woods is designing a petition to save approximately 10-acre woods. This kind of relates to some of the things you were talking about on the Crown Court Concealed property. The 10-acre woods is the northernmost point of Baltimore's Woods Corridor. That is zoned industrial at the moment, but also is going to house the Dempsey Greenway Trail and the chance that they might want people to sell it to, sure.
Okay.
And then Metro then would own it for you.
No, Metro will not own it. They need to, this is why we're doing a petition. They need Parks to own it and maintain it.
Mhm.
And so if Parks is not willing to do that, it's not gonna happen. Metro's not gonna own it.
Will Metro let a conservancy like
They might,
Willamette
that's
River?
not ideal, but they could do that.
I mean, that's the only reason I know is because I'm on that bond advisory committee for Metro, and they have a thing called local share,
Yeah.
which is where Metro puts in money and the local entity would put in money, and it essentially allows a kitty to grow, and then they're able to purchase it. And then the part of that agreement is that the local municipality would manage it. And that's called the local share program. That works. I mean, I've seen it happen, not here, but in Lake Oswego. It's happened in Milwaukee and someplace in
Could the
San.
municipality be something other than parks?
It would be Park City of Portland Parks and Rec, right?
Yeah. They said it had to be publicly owned.
Yeah, so that would be,
So once they find a partner that will publicly own it, they will not be able to do it.
that's talking about.
But it's a very cool woodland.
Yeah.
We've always had our eye on it. 10 acres of woods right in the middle of a residential area,
Yeah, that means
but on the edge of a residential versus industrial area.
Okay.
Right.
It's exactly what we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who owns it?
It is owned by a company called SSI, a shredding company, and it's an investment property.
So it's not actually function, there's nothing.
No, it's not functioning. There's nothing on it. It's just,
It's steel and where are you talking about?
no, I'm talking about places close where you live, Acre Woods. At the end of Edison.
So SSI, is that Josh?
Is it what?
Is that the Josh pallet shredding company?
No, it's not job. SSI is a corporation. They make shredding equipment. But they just have it as an investment here. Investment.
I wonder how many of those there are around.
Oh, there's quite a few in the industrial area.
That grows the number that I have of vacant lots to unoccupied, not used lots. That probably gets in the tens of thousands. Ooh,
It would be interesting in the hub in the harbor to look at what our vacant what I want to try to do is when we get to the North Reach plan is to rezone every one of those and get those out of heavy industrial so we don't keep layering on, like we begin to get a break.
In 2015, when Bob Salinger was working on the North Reach plan, when it was first being developed, they had something called the String of Pearls. That lot, that 10-acre was one of the string. Now it appears to be outside of the North Reach plan. Somehow they moved the border.
Well, we'll have, when they get to that, we need to talk about that border. I'm very interested in that. There's soup over here and I don't like taking it home. If you feel like you can still, anyway, this what, yeah, delightful. Do you,
Thank you for cooking soup.
Yeah, that's.
so can we have access to